The alarms had stopped screaming 3 hours ago, and that silence was worse than any sound I had ever heard. My name is Vess, and I am the last administrator still transmitting from Ashway Prime. I am not a soldier. I have never held a weapon in my life, but I am the only one left in this station with a working signal. So, I am the one who has to speak. For days ago, our sensors picked up a fleet crossing into our system. Not traders. Not travelers. A hunting swarm called the CRE Horn. A force that moves from world to world and leaves nothing behind. We had heard stories of what they do to the places they visit. We never thought we would be one of those places. We are gardeners and glassmakers. We trade silk and crystal. We do not build warships because we never believed we would need them. There is an old promise between all the civilized worlds. A treaty called the Great Compact that says no signed world stands alone against destruction. I believed in that promise with my whole heart. I sat in our council chamber and listened as our ambassador called for help exactly as the treaty allowed. The reply took 6 days. 6 days of meetings while an enemy fleet closed the distance between stars. 6 days of delegates arguing about rules and budgets and something called strategic value, as if a number on a page could decide who deserved to live. In the end, the council voted that helping us would cost too much for too little gain. They read the decision aloud like it was nothing. Then they closed the channel. We had less than 4 days left before the CRE fleet would reach us. 4 days to move a civilization that had never needed to run before. We loaded every transport ship we owned, every cargo hauler, every small craft that could still fly. We saved perhaps 2 million people out of 11 billion. My own mother refused a seat. She said she was too old to spend her final days fleeing, and that her garden needed her more than any distant colony ship did. I stayed behind, too. Someone needed to keep sending the truth out into the dark for as long as there was still a truth left to send. On the 3rd day, when I had almost given up hope of anyone answering, a single ship responded. It was not a council vessel. Carried no official seal. It was a worn transport ship flying a flag I barely recognized from old trade records. A young species most of the galaxy still considered small and unimportant. Humans. I remembered reading once that they were new to interstellar travel, with barely any fleet worth mentioning. Not the kind of name anyone expected to matter. A woman's voice came through, tired but sharp with anger. Her name was Laura, captain of that transport. She told me her ship had picked up our distress signal 2 days earlier and had been trying ever since to get anyone, to respond. I explained what had happened. The vote, the 6 days, the silence that followed. There was a long pause on the channel. Then she said something I will never forget. She told me to hold our position, to keep transmitting no matter what happened next, and that help was coming. I did not understand what she meant until the following hours changed everything. It turned out Laura had not waited for permission from any official channel. She had sent our distress call through every human frequency she could reach, a network some humans call the Quiet Path, built for moments exactly like this one. Ships that were never supposed to be nearby began answering. Not more transports. Warships. I watched them appear on what remained of our sensor grid, and I confess I did not understand what I was seeing. They looked nothing like the graceful cruisers other fleets used. They were thick, heavy, built like closed fists rather than open hands. I later learned they belonged to something humans call a defense fleet, a force built on one simple rule. If a call for help goes out, someone answers it. No matter the cost. No matter whether anyone gave permission first. The CRE fleet arrived above Ashway Prime 11 hours later, expecting to find an empty world ready for the taking. Instead, they found dozens of human ships already in position, spread out in a pattern our own people could not begin to understand. We had no trained officers of our own, only frightened merchants and farmers trying to make sense of numbers on a screen. But I watched, and I listened to the calm voices coming through the shared channel. And I understood one thing clearly. These humans were not here to test the enemy. They were here to hold this line, and not move from it. The fighting lasted through the night. I will not describe every detail because some things are better left as feelings rather than images. I remember the light in the sky changing colors I had never seen before. I remember the sound of our own people cheering in the shelters below when word came that the enemy formation had broken apart and turned away. I remember silence again afterward, but this time it was the silence of relief, not fear. Laura's ship did not survive that night. Neither did several others that answered with her. They came with no promise of victory and no guarantee of thanks. And they gave everything anyway for a world they had never even traded with before. 3 days later, when the first human relief convoy landed to help us rebuild, I met a young officer named Ethan, who had served under Laura before her ship was lost. I asked him the question that had been sitting in my chest since the moment her voice first answered ours. Why would anyone risk so much for people they had never met, people the rest of the galaxy had already given up on? He looked at me for a long moment before answering, the way someone looks at a question that feels almost too simple to need words. He said that somebody sent out a call for help, and that was the whole reason. Nothing more complicated than that. In the days that followed, I learned more about what had happened far above our heads while we hid in shelters below. The human fleet had not been sent by any government order. They had acted on their own judgment using something Ethan called standing doctrine, a set of rules built into their culture long before any of this began. If a signed world sends a distress call and no one else responds within a certain window, the nearest available human force is permitted, even expected, to act without waiting for approval. It sounded almost reckless to me at first. Then I understood it was the opposite of reckless. It was a promise written into their laws that no one within reach of a human ship would ever be left to face annihilation completely alone. The Galactic Council has since opened an inquiry into what they are calling an unauthorized engagement at Ashway Prime. I have read the early reports. There is talk of formal criticism, perhaps even sanctions aimed at a species that broke procedure to save 11 billion lives. The same council had already written off as too costly to protect. I attended one of the council sessions by remote link, still recovering, still surrounded by the wreckage of our outer stations. I listened to delegates speak about protocol and precedent, about the danger of allowing any single species to act outside agreed procedure. Not one of them spoke about the 11 billion people who were still alive because someone finally chose to act. I asked to speak, and after some hesitation, they allowed it. I told them what I had seen. I told them about Laura's voice on that channel, tired and furious, promising help she had no official right to promise. I told them about ships built like closed fists, arriving with no guarantee of survival, holding a line above a world with no strategic value written anywhere on any council ledger. I told them that my mother was alive tonight, tending her garden because a species barely anyone in that chamber had bothered to take seriously decided that a call for help was never a matter of paperwork. Some of the delegates looked away. A few nodded slowly. None of them offered an apology, not directly, but I did not need one. I had already seen what mattered most, written across the wreckage of our orbit and the quiet relief in our shelters. In the weeks since, our people have begun rebuilding slowly, carefully, the way we always have. Our gardens are returning. Our glassworks are lighting again. And something else has changed, too. Something quieter, but just as real. We no longer speak of humans the way we once did, as a small, unproven species barely worth noticing on a trade manifest. I think of Ethan's words often, the simplicity of them, the way he said them without any need for embellishment. Somebody called for help. That was the whole reason. I do not know what the Council will ultimately decide about humanity's place among the older, more established worlds. I do not know if their fleet will face real consequences for choosing lives over procedure. I find that I care less about those outcomes with each passing day. What I know instead is this. On the night our world was meant to end, when every official channel had gone silent and every promise from every powerful civilization had failed us, it was the newest and smallest voice in the galaxy that answered anyway. Not because a treaty demanded it. Not because there was profit in it. But because somewhere out among the stars, a simple rule had been written into the heart of an entire species. A rule that said, no distress call would ever go unanswered while they still had ships to send. My mother still tends her garden beneath our twin suns. The silk glass still catches the morning light the way it always has. And every evening, when I walk past the old sensor array that first carried Laura's voice to us, I remember that some promises are kept not because a council forces them to be, but because someone, somewhere, simply decided they would be. We used to describe humans as untested, as a curiosity rather than a power, as a young species still finding its place among the old and the strong. We do not describe them that way anymore. And if the stars ever bring another hunting swarm toward our small, quiet world, I no longer wonder whether anyone will come.